All right, folks, here we are for another session of Off the Grid. I wanted to welcome my next guest, who is based out of the West Coast. She's an amazing interdisciplinary artist whose works span performance, installation, new media, and public encounters. Hey, welcome to Anida Yoeu Ali. How are you this morning? Thank you for hopping on with me.
Hi, Romello from the land of the Puyallup people. It's also called Tacoma, although, it's supposed to be called Tahoma if you were to use the indigenous name, which we seldom do since, we're all part of this colonial settlerism that's here.
I
But
had
yes,
no
thank you
idea.
for having me. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited. Like I mentioned, I've been a big fan of your work from back to the day, and it was exciting to find out all the new stuff that you were doing. I'm curious, can we just kind of start with where you were born and how you ended up in Washington today? What was kind of the path to that?
Yeah. Well, I am considered the generation of 1.5ers, and that just means we're not quite second generation. And because we were born elsewhere, we're not quite first generation. So I sort of am in between those two generations in terms of, the waves of immigration, except that for my family, we were refugees. We were classified, through the United Nations as refugees. I was born in Cambodia in a city called Battambang, which is pretty, it's the largest city closest to the border between
Okay.
Cambodia and Thailand. And from there, when the borders reopened during the war, to which my family was trapped in the mid 1970s,
Oh,
and
wow.
that was when the Khmer Rouge
Yep.
took over Cambodia and decided to, put into play this horrible social experiment of emptying out all of the urban centers and, flipping the script on those who had it or have it and those who didn't have it so much. So it was a huge class warfare, and it was a real attack on anyone who was, quote, different or unpure. And so my family were Muslims. We're part Cham, which is an ethnic minority. Sort of we're educated, so we're clicking off all these boxes that
Yeah.
to my Rouge, was considered not pure Khmer.
Hmm.
And so many people from my town and my village, family members, extended family, were brutalized and killed. And luckily, my parents survived, and
Yeah.
I was, 3 years old when it
Wow.
all went down, and we were stuck there until I was 5 years old.
Okay.
And when the borders reopened, my family walked, hundreds of miles to the border
Yeah.
to seek shelter and safety in a refugee camp located at the border of Thailand and
Right.
Cambodia. And my grandfather, who worked for the government prior to the Khmer Rouge taking over, was already flown out, and he
Okay.
landed in Chicago
Ah,
in the USA.
see.
And so when the borders reopened and he got word that his family, some members of his family, was still alive,
Yeah.
he then able to sponsor us out of the refugee camps into America. And so we were one of the lucky ones who, made the trek early in
Yeah.
1979 and did not stay in the refugee camps for too long because of our, outside connection to my grandfather. And so he was able to sponsor us to the United States of America, to Chicago. And
Yeah.
that is where I was raised most of my entire life and my
I see.
adult life. But it's only been 8 years since I moved out to the Pacific Northwest
Okay.
in Tacoma, Washington.
And so you mentioned that eventually that you moved out to Chicago, and that is another exciting chapter in your life as you became and, and you were raised out there, and that's how I found out about your work. But later on, you would be part of a collective. I was born with two tongues, and you guys did that. You guys took that music, spoken word, and deconstructed your interpretation of America and Americans, and uh, taught us about it from your perspective. And so that work and the CD that you guys put out in 1999, Broken Speak, how did that shape you into the person that you are today?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I think an important one. As much as I don't, love talking about my past work, I think that moment and the energy that came with that moment really sparked something inside of
Yep.
me. I mean, definitely my work with I Was Born with Two Tongues helped to give me a stage, and that stage helped to be a platform for my voice and my
Mhm.
thoughts and my politicization. I came up at a time when it was a little bit lonely to be both an artist and activist, and to be politicized as an Asian American with identity politics that aligned with other affinity groups, with other groups that were also suffering grave injustices. I think that that was the biggest difference with what we were trying to do as a spoken word quartet. It was a moment where we got to be unapologetically
Yep.
Asian in America, but also in alignment with hip hop culture that the four of us grew up on, with a sort of rigor on writing. All of us had a very strong English and literature and writing background.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, we were people who aligned ourselves with the Free Mumia, Free Abu Jamal Mumia movement, with brutality that was committed by police officers at the time. I mean, we didn't have a name for it other than
Yeah.
we knew that the police did some really awful things to Black and brown bodies, and Asian Americans who were also targeted, like the anti-Asian violence and the hate crimes. That was another big movement that we were also highlighting in our work, was
Yeah.
what's being called, Stop Anti-Hate. Now, you know,
You were
what is
doing
this,
back in the day.
25 years later, we're
I know.
still talking about the same issues, the same struggles that we had. So, it really points to the institutional racism, the institutional system that's in place to really suppress entire groups of people.
Yeah, and I'll say again, you were in Chicago and I was in California, and just to see what you guys were doing was just really inspirational. And just again, I think it also inspired, I mean, folks like myself to have a voice. So it was cool to see you guys on that platform speaking from the Asian perspective. I remember seeing you guys. I was like, "Who are these guys? Oh my gosh, they're amazing!" And speaking from their mind and just educating, and yeah, it was mind blowing. So I had to talk to you about that briefly, but yeah,
Well,
but
and I would also add to that, something that it was very clear that when we took to the stage,
uh-huh.
there was so little expectation of us, and
Hmm.
that's another thing, right? That Asians in America face all the time is
Yeah,
this image on us as if we can't speak good English, and let
yeah,
alone rap it or speak it fast, or, do
hmm,
this art form called spoken word. So I think that every time we would get on the mic, it would blow people away because they expected so little of these
right,
four people who happened to be Asians, who
yeah,
were, doing this form really well and really loudly. So I think that was interesting to see, to feel, to experience, that we were able to really
break
come in at a moment.
stereotypes.
Yes,
Oh,
break some severe stereotypes, but
destroyed them.
also, you know, put some good work out there.
Yeah, and when I was going, like, as I was prepping for this interview, I was like trying to think back if there was anybody else doing what you guys were doing, and I just couldn't think of an example in terms of like Asian folks using that platform to message what you guys were doing. So just props to you for what you did, and that was amazing. And it's amazing too how that kind of just launched into what you were doing today. And so a lot of prep work into who you are today. But when did you kind of have an idea that you wanted to become an artist? Was that quite young, or was that just kind of a development and progression through your timeline of life?
Well, I have wanted to be an artist since I think my earliest memory is like since I was 9 years old.
Wow.
And yeah, I tell the story about
Mm,
um in Chicago, the suburbs was where I grew up in the west
okay.
suburbs of Chicago. And there was a coloring contest at a local McDonald's. And that was all that it took. I just filled out some, like sort of paper place setting looking drawing, and I colored it in. I turned it into the local McDonald's and I actually placed. Not
Hey,
was not first place, but I placed and I
that's
won
it.
these adult size tube socks with golden arches, on the side, and it was too big for me, so I gifted it to my dad, and that was it. I was like, "Oh my God, you win prizes as an artist? This is it, tube socks." Yeah, but that was essentially one of the many moments.
Yeah.
Um, but I was always drawing. I was
Oh,
always drawing. I was always doodling, and then took a lot of art classes, as many as I could in middle school and in high school. And then in high school, I even took college
yeah.
level drawing classes
Oh,
and
wow.
art classes. So, that was at the College of DuPage, which is near my town, and that that's how I knew, like, okay, I have a skill.
Yeah.
What can I do with this? And of course, my parents wanted me to pick something really commercial. And so I sort of fell into graphic design,
Okay.
because I thought it was viable. And back then we called it commercial art.
Ah,
This is like coming up right before the computer and the Apple, really, the desktop Apple Macintosh changed
right.
things for graphic designers. And so
Yeah.
I was in college when that change happened, when we all sort of migrated from, doing things by hand into the computer. So yeah, that was really quite something to be part of that transition from analog, to
Yeah. To digital, right? Eventually, you'd find yourself in Washington. And was the move fueled by the creation or the founding of Studio Revolt, your media lab? Is that what fueled the move from Chicago to Washington, or was that just something else that had drawn you to Washington?
well, I we ended up living in Cambodia from
Oh,
two
wow.
yeah, so there's a whole arc of a journey here. It's sort of after Two Tongues, I was part of Mango Tribe, which was a multimedia theater group,
Okay.
based in Chicago, and that was because I felt too confined by spoken word
Yeah.
and by text. I wanted to do more with my
I
body,
see.
um, a visual setting for my work.
Oh, man.
I fell into poetry because it was the most inexpensive art form coming out of art school.
Makes sense.
So I couldn't afford like photography, film at the time, and
Yeah.
painting, right? I did a lot of painting as well, and just couldn't afford it anymore. And fell into writing original words as I met, Dennis Kim,
Yeah.
Marlon Escara, and Emily Chang, and that period was so inspiring, to do that work as the four
Yeah.
of us. And then I started to travel overseas, between 2002
Okay.
and 2000, I don't know, like 7, between
Yeah.
that period of those 5 years of traveling back and forth,
Okay.
you would have to flex your skills as an artist when you would travel, especially amongst other artists.
Sure.
I would get these invitations to go overseas to Vietnam, to India,
Wow.
and then you'd have to flex. And so what I had was spoken word,
Yeah.
which is
Oh
super
man.
English based.
Yeah.
And so I would perform my heart out with all this energy, but the work failed to translate in the way that I was used to with an all English speaking audience.
Audience. Yeah.
So that really devastated me. Like, oh my God, I just like, gave you this like amazing performance, and people would be like, oh my God, clapping like that was so passionate and
But
great.
didn't know
But
the context behind it.
right. But like, what was it about? And why are
Yeah.
you so angry? Like, what's happening? Like it
Right.
really failed to transmit in the same way. And it didn't work for me. I didn't like that. I didn't like that I couldn't connect to, a non-English speaking audience the way that I
Yeah.
saw my musician friends and dancer friends do it. They could totally connect,
Right.
even visual artist friends. They
Yeah.
could totally connect beyond borders and language
Yeah.
through their art form.
Sure.
And so that really planted the seed in me to think
And
about going nonverbal and more visual with
right.
work.
Wow,
And
that's
really, yeah,
wild. Yeah, because you're right, because the music, you listen to the music and there's no words that you have to listen to, so you can vibe with it or determine mood on what the music sounds like. And then visual, you see and they interpret, right? But then, yeah, you're right. The words, it's just like maybe just, and not their fault, they just speak a different language, right? And
yeah,
yeah, yeah, and so comprehension is different, right? Oh man, that's wild. So I could see and I understand the transformation of you as a spoken artist into a multimedia artist. That's wild. And so I wanted to talk about some of your work and how it transitioned to that, and specifically the Red Chador, right? And
hmm
so I saw that you did a thought-provoking film in 2023. And was that all you who came up with the concept and you were the producer of that? It just the just oh man, just the pictures look very amazing. And I mentioned to you, I was like, oh man, I hope I get the opportunity to watch the film sometime. But what was that all you behind that?
Yeah, well, that's in collaboration with my partner,
Mhm.
Masahiro Sugano, who's a filmmaker from Japan, and
Ah,
we're also a husband and wife
okay.
team, and is the father to three of my children.
Love it.
And so, we have a whole thing happening here with art and life and family.
Yeah.
And I think since collaborating with him, in 2009, 2010 was when we started to work together.
Oh,
He's really brought a whole nother layer of cinematic beauty to my work, to the documentation of it through these really amazing photographs, but also the video art pieces.
mhm.
We sort of shoot ideas at each other, and then we see, if it's a possibility. And then when we get these invitations to do what are commissioning residencies,
Yeah.
that's when really the idea of performing live to an unsuspecting public, that's usually part of what the Red Chador does, is take herself out to the streets, to the bus
Yeah.
stop, to the train stations, to the
Wow.
parks, to the sidewalks, to the beaches, and just engage with whoever comes across her path. And
Oh, God.
kind of, and really surprise people with kind of art happening in your face,
Yeah.
wherever that might be. I call them the unsuspecting public. And,
Yeah.
the Red Chador was conceived to address Islamophobia,
Yeah.
and it was created in 2015, and
Okay.
it's an ongoing work that has also changed over the years from a solo person as the
Right.
Red Door to now the Red Door has these friends, this sisterhood of other chadoras
Yep.
in different colors of the rainbow
Yeah.
spectrum.
It's so beautiful.
And yeah, and so and they're that's what they are. They are a walking sort of army of peace,
Yeah.
a
Oh, I
colorful,
like that.
a colorful army of peace and of understanding. And what's so interesting about that work each and every time I perform it live, is that you know you do not see any indication of who the person is underneath this, this cloak of shiny fabric, of sparkly,
Right.
sequins. They are not racialized, they are not gendered, they are just you know that there's somebody in there, but you don't know who. So it's very interesting to see them become a kind of mirror reflecting what people are already feeling, right?
Mhm.
What people are already holding on to
Yeah.
in reaction to her, because the reaction to the red chador and her chadoras are very very polarizing. People have some tremendous anxiety around her and fear and distrust. And I would argue it's because they already hold that. So
Oh,
if you already hold some Islamophobic reactions in general, and you see this entity and this entourage, and you think that is
interesting.
like, a scary Muslim woman, then that's gonna be your read. That's gonna be your interaction is going to be transmitting that
Yeah, yeah.
same distrust and
Because
that same
that's what they knew.
alarmness.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I didn't know that the so that you mentioned that you kind of just put the Chadoras there with the unsuspecting public. So was that Australia Commission where you guys just went out in public and nobody knew? And oh man, that is
Yeah.
wild. And I
So
was
like,
surprised.
yeah, and I did it where you are too in Hawaii.
I know. I know.
Yeah, at the Shangri-La. But yes, all of the commissions for the performances, it's not announced that this is going to happen. It
That
just,
is crazy.
yeah, that's a very important part. Although we have people on hand because the none of us talk, and so
Right.
what happens is usually we will signal that we need somebody to come
For help or just
in our team to
yeah.
explain if someone is just really like disturbed or
That's
just
right.
in our faces asking for more questions,
Yeah.
'cause we only communicate through gestures, through
Mhm.
friendly greeting and bowing and
Yeah.
a sense of humility and holding space for people. And some people will want a hug. Sometimes
Yep.
some people get very emotional. That's what
Yep.
happened in Seattle. People were crying and had,
Oh,
because some people, for them, they know exactly what the piece is about,
right.
and it's such a moment when you put a covered woman, and you give her this public platform. So some people really do get it and want, they know everything that comes with what it means to
Yeah.
have the courage to perform in this, with this sense of anonymity.
Yeah. And I knew this was all you conceptually. And I thought you were just the creative director behind it. I don't know if I can reveal the secret. I had no idea that you were playing in it too, that you were a part of that. I don't know if
Yes,
that's supposed to
that's
be a
my
secret, but I was like,
yeah.
well, you blew my mind. I was like, oh, you're the actual person behind inside of the Chador. I thought that was really cool that you partook in that, aside from it
Oh
being your
yeah, that's
idea.
my these are all my, extensions of my personas.
Yeah.
So the red chador is that, the Buddhist bug, the white mother, um, the red naga, the vertigo dress
Yeah.
woman, the palimpsest is a piece that I'm like restaging a lot now, which is the one where she has the cascading head of hair that goes over the wall.
Yeah, and would you mind telling me where you got it made? Was that made in the United States or overseas? I want to know where one gets something like that made. It's just an amazing piece.
Yeah, most of my work was done during the period of time I lived in Cambodia and established a network of people there. So from 2010 to 2015, we lived in Cambodia.
Okay.
Well, it's more like 2011. Um, and I also gave birth in Cambodia and raised a bit of,
Wow.
my kids when they were really young were raised out there. And Cambodia really affected me. I think living there and deciding to reside there and take root for a short bit, opened me up to being inspired by the contemporary art and film scene there,
Yeah.
establishing these amazing friends and assistants and people who were so game to do things that in America would take like months, if not years, to accomplish. I could do it in Cambodia in weeks, or in a couple months maximum. There wasn't a long wait or a lot of hoops you had to run through for permission. And, you know, um, I think between myself and Masahiro, we were just so inspired to be
Awesome.
artists
Yeah.
out there, and that's exactly what we did. And
Yeah.
Cambodia gifted us the time and the means and the resources to do
Amazing.
stuff, including, an incredible NGO called Friends International
Okay.
that had a sewing team, and they were so game
Wow.
to tailor many of my costumes because it gave a lot of these sewing workers a break from their usual sewing of merchandise,
Right.
as they're part of a social entrepreneur program that's sewing so that you could sell some merchandise to keep it going. And they made some beautiful stuff. But with my work, they were one of a kind pieces. And the team was so good and smart and resourceful and great to work with. And so um, I have been working with them, and
Yeah.
I also work with an amazing coordinator, Dana Lingual from Java Creative Cafe, who's been a big fan of mine since landing in Cambodia.
Yeah.
And it's her support and her ability to coordinate the right people to be, helping me manifest my ideas, was an incredible gift and continues to be.
Yeah. Hey, that's amazing. And I love that it was at the Seattle Art Museum and the sign too was amazing. The display with your name and the picture of you standing over the water in Honolulu was just really beautiful. And I'm a fan of that. As I was doing the research on it, there was a story about the disappearance of it in 2017. And so, do you mind just briefly talking about that? I was like, whoa, it actually misplaced or did someone actually steal it? And did you get the original one back? I'm interested.
Yeah, so no, I never got it back.
Ah,
The original one that was made in 2015 disappeared in 2017 as lost luggage in quotation marks. And
yeah,
what happened was I was invited as a guest speaker at the first ever Palestinian Performing Arts Network conference in Ramallah in the territories of Palestine, which we also know as the West Bank over there. And I was traveling. In order for me to get to that conference, I had to travel from Kuala Lumpur, which was
okay.
where I performed the Red Chador
Oh,
and as the Red Chador last. And I did this in front of thousands of people as the Red Chador in Malaysia. And then I packed up that original garment and put it in a suitcase. And I had two suitcases traveling with me to Ramallah. in order to go to Ramallah, you have to go through Israel. And so my port of entry was Tel Aviv, and
Okay.
I had a very hard time getting into the country. And it was evident the moment I jumped on my flight from Bangkok to Tel Aviv. I was strip searched in a closet, and all of my belongings that were supposed to be carry-on was dumped out and checked in, and I was given only my phone without a charger and my passport and my wallet. Everything else had to be checked in, like my iPad, my laptop, everything. They just dumped everything out. And so that was already a sign because, once I got onto the plane, I noticed everybody else had their laptops and their
See.
iPad. It was just me that somehow was targeted. And I was already asked the question of, am I Muslim? What was I doing in Malaysia, and why am I traveling there? All the sort of suspicious, the questions that hint at suspicion.
Sure.
And then when I got in, I was detained upon arrival for about 5 hours. I finally got out because, I answered the questions, the same questions they would badger you over and over with, and they would threaten you with deportation if you coughed up any attitude, which at some point, I was tired. And I was invited there. There's nothing I didn't tell the truth about.
Sure.
So I was finally released, and I didn't even intend to perform as the Red Chador. It was a talk, and
Mm.
my garment just happened to be with me as I was in transit to get back to the US. And I did not take a lot of photos because a lot of my friends were telling me that, you might want to post your hard drive and your media because they might confiscate it on your way out. And I didn't, and I told my friends, well, I didn't really do anything. I don't really don't have any footage. Like I could lose it and it'll be fine because I was very conscious of that. But I didn't think that my garment was going to be
Mm.
something that might be something that they would want to take. And so I left, and my route was Tel Aviv to Istanbul to Chicago to Seattle. And when I landed in Chicago, my bags did not show up. And that's my port of entry into the US. And so the officials held me back and said, we'll put you up for a night in Chicago because you need to wait for your bags and then we
Mm.
can let you go. And the next night, the next day, my bags still didn't turn up, but they were like, oh, it must have already gone to Seattle. So we're going to let you go.
Yeah.
I show up in Seattle and the bags are not there. And then a couple days later, one bag comes back to me, and the missing bag is the one that
Fedora.
had the chador, the original 2015 red chador. And so
See.
I called 2 weeks later, and they tracked it, and they said it never left Tel Aviv, and
See.
there's no way we can get it back for you.
Yeah, and since then it's further expanded even more into different colors and different people. So fascinating how that expanded and just the story behind how it started in 2015, where you're at today. And you do so much work and that was there. And then you did the most recently the Buddhist bug exhibit too, which was quite amazing too, and how people got the opportunity to try it too as well. And so how did that how was that an offshoot? I assume that happened after the creation of the Chador, right? The Buddhist bug idea. That one too was another mind-blowing one for me.
Yeah, well, no, the Buddhist bug came first,
I
and
did. Oh,
yeah, Buddhist bug came first, and that's the one that I think is the most popular piece around the world,
yeah.
and with different communities and stuff because I think it's so quirky and
Yeah, it's
fun and
fun. Yeah.
playful. Yeah, and it's just ridiculous, it's like a woman is dressed as like an orange caterpillar that's,
I love it.
vacillating. So I think it brings a lot of joy to people because it's
Yeah.
that sort of double take moment of like, am I like seeing this right? And I love that. I love that that little bit of playfulness that comes
Yeah.
out with people with
Yeah.
this because
Yeah.
it's third,
It's good for
and
families, right? Yeah.
great for
That's
family
what I
kids.
love.
Yeah, kids have a really great time with it. And so that piece was started in 2009 as part of my graduate work at the School of the Art Institute Chicago.
Oh
And
wow.
then I didn't complete it until I landed in Cambodia and had the prototype costume with me and then remade it with the Friends International Sewing Team. And so in 2012 and 2013 was when the Buddhist bug fully came to life.
I
And
see.
that was through the gift of being in Cambodia and doing it in all these different places that were both urban and rural
Yeah.
and capturing a very rapidly changing landscape of Cambodia.
Yeah. I hope at some point I get to see this stuff in person. Just really fascinating. And I love the pictures, the colors, the way that you position everything. Everything seems so calculated and just very appealing to the visual eye. And I imagine it must be triple the experience in person. Really, really cool. And just it just gives me an appetite to learn more or to anticipate what you're going to be doing in the future. And you're quite the traveler too. I mean, just we've gone through this whole thing, and you've been around the world, and you just recently returned from Indonesia. Uh, to I think it's probably the Chador too, from what I saw, but I'm not sure. But how was Indonesia?
Well, no, Indonesia, I recently came back from because I took a group of BIPOC artists from Tacoma to Jogja and
Oh,
Jakarta, and that is a whole nother part of me where I just love helping people see
yeah,
other parts of the world as viable examples
okay,
of art cities, of cities who cherish the artists and who embrace the creative economy, in helping artists to kind of make money to sustain their practice. And that trip was that was like kind of a tour of art places that I set up
right,
to bring these folks that I thought would get a lot out of seeing another non-Western example of how people are doing it despite their conditions of great poverty. And you know, it was a really mind-blowing experience for
yeah,
everybody, including myself.
yeah,
The Indonesian artists really embraced us and shared so much with us, from their ideas to their practice to just breaking bread with us
yeah,
and sharing stories and, communicating and just opening up our my group's like ideas to what is possible. Um, so yeah, it was a really great trip, and I'll be going back there in early October because
fantastic.
the Indonesian curator selected a couple of my pieces to
Wow.
so the Buddhist Bug will be performing in Jakarta, and then
Oh
I have
man.
another piece that they're fabricating, that they're producing.
So in the time that I've spoken to you, talk to me about how you initially went overseas and you could not really connect spoken word as much as you wanted to. And fast forward now to over 20 years, and you're now connecting to the art that you're doing. So I love it, just the progression into where you're at. It's amazing. And I love how you put so much thought into that. And so I just wanted to thank you again just for the experience of learning your story. And just again, I've been a fan of your work since the beginning. And I love that you're a mentor, and what you did in the 90s should not be overlooked. I just wanted to honor you for that. And so thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share your story. So I mentioned this is kind of when I did this was kind of a hip hop culture music focused podcast. So I always like to close out with some fun stuff and just ask you a little bit about music too. But before I ask you about music, what do you like to do for fun? You're a mom, you work, you get art stuff going on. I don't even know if you have time to do any hobbies. Do you have any?
Okay, I watch a lot of K-drama.
Ah, me
So
too.
I
Yeah.
binge yeah, I binge watch, and
Uh-huh.
I love it, and I didn't get why I love it so much, but I figured it out. It's that, first of all, the stories of the K-drama is
Yeah.
so amazing, and it draws you in with these
Yeah.
complex, like,
Ah,
characters, right? The side
complex.
characters. Yes, like, the side characters all have
Yeah.
something going on, and there's always a layer of humor,
Right.
romance, the pining, right? Like, there not a
Yeah.
lot of, like, sexually explicit stuff, but it's always the longing, the pining,
The
the missed
subtle.
commitment, right? I love it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then they're tear jerkers. So I'm
Oh,
getting this
yeah.
cathartic release, right, through this ridiculous melodrama.
Okay.
And so I'm like crying and laughing and then like suspenseful and what's gonna happen next? And oh no, she didn't, like I love it.
Oh, hey,
So that's what I do for fun.
is that an experience that you share with your husband, or is that purely just an Anita thing?
No, it's totally my thing, and sometimes the kids
Yeah.
will
All right.
watch, like, a little episode with me. They're not allowed to watch it fully, but they come
Yeah.
in, and, a lot of those shows are also family friendly, and
Yeah. Yeah.
so I get a few episodes like, Extraordinary Attorney Woo. My kids and I love that so much.
I haven't started that one yet.
Oh, it's so good. It's so
Oh,
good. Yeah.
holy cow! Yeah, I'm a big fan. I started with Itaewon class because I lived in
Oh,
Korea for
yes!
2 years.
I love that one too. My kids were watching it with me too. That one is a
Yeah,
great one. It's so on.
yeah, and I just I was watching it just so that I could be familiar with the Korean language, and then I was trying to just learn some of the slang. And then after like the third episode, I stopped watching it for language. I was like, oh, what's happening in the show? And so that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of K drama, so that's great to hear. Pretty funny. Well, hey, what about music wise? You've done music too, and so what's on your music playlist these days?
Oh my God, what's on my music playlist? I was just talking to my husband how it doesn't seem to advance. It's like I feel like no, I feel like it's stuck in
Right.
like the early zeros,
Okay.
or like maybe late 90s. I feel
Yeah.
like really I always, especially for the kids, I
Uh-huh.
like play the same things that I used to listen to. So that's like The Cure, or I'll
Nice.
just say, "Hey, Google, 90s hip hop," and then some playlists will like come on.
Okay.
So I think that's what's interesting. And then sometimes I'll dig out the old
Yeah.
CDs from like the Pacifics and stuff and
Oh man.
or a Geo from Blue Scholar or
Yeah.
Ruby Ibarra, like I really love some of that. I haven't
Yeah.
shown them like Native Gun yet, and
Oh,
you
I
know,
love Native Guns.
Kiwi, and so all
Bamboo.
those
Yeah.
guys I think are super impressive. I think Magnetic North I've played for them, and Tayo Na,
Okay.
and Denizen Kane when he went solo.
Yeah. Oh,
So,
he's awesome too. Well, that's great. And so I guess let me ask you this real quick. So it's funny. I'm probably stuck in the '90s too, so I laugh with you. But what you were doing, I feel draws roots from hip hop, right, when you were doing in the '90s. So who inspired you at that time? Who was kind of the rapper or the group that Anita was in love with?
well, that's a great question, to kind of circle back to the years of Two Tongues, and really, it was a Filipino group in Seattle called
Oh,
Isang Mahal. They were called Isang Mahal Arts Collective, and there was a group of them that came in 1998
okay.
to Chicago. And at the time, we were just, doing open mic scenes, and then we saw a flyer that said this group is performing in like downstate Illinois at like Illinois State University or something. And we
Wow.
decided on a whim to drive down there and meet them. We
Yeah.
didn't have anything else to do. We were in our early 20s, and so we drove down there to meet them, and we basically kidnapped them afterwards. First of all, like we bum rush the stage after the performance, and our
That's
jaws
fun.
dropped, and we just totally fell in love with their poetry and their energy and their vibe. And
Yeah.
there were six of them that came, and so we're like, we have two cars. You're gonna have to squeeze in and like come to Chicago, because you're like far away from Chicago, and this is not, where culture is. You're in like the cornfields, and so we basically kidnapped them to Chicago for 24 hours because they were like, "Oh, our flight leaves like the next day, so we only have like 24 hours." And so we're like, "Okay, well,
We
come on."
got it.
It was one of those crazy, like, spur of the moment thing, and we spent a whole 24 hours, nobody slept, and
Oh,
we
the
were
good times.
vibing and sharing our work, and then at that time, Emily and I didn't weren't fully performing yet. It was just,
Okay. Oh, wow.
boys. It was just Marlon and Dennis, and
Okay.
so they everybody was freestyling, and we
Yeah,
were, experiencing this, and we couldn't
man.
believe it that we found these Asian Americans that were just as politicized and just as cool. And so, um, then fast forward a few months later, we were so inspired by them that we started writing. Emily and I started writing individual pieces and
That's so cool.
duets, and then we did a piece as all four of us. And Dennis and Marlon had an opportunity to take over an open mic stage, like to be
Fantastic.
presented, and they wanted to expand it to other Asian Americans. They were like firm that they can't be alone in this, but they couldn't find anyone else except
Right.
for myself and Emily. And then I Was Born with Two Tongues was birth out of the work we wrote, inspired by Isang Mahal.
Wow.
And then we took to the stage, and the rest is history.
I love it.
But
Yeah. That's a great way to end this. And so I will forever be a fan of the work that you guys did, and I'm still a fan of the work that you're doing today. I love how you're just pushing the envelope, mentoring, traveling around the world, sharing your story, and I'll continue to follow that. And like I said, I'm going to come see it in person. But with that, any final words before we close out this amazing session? Thank you so much for your time. It was an honor.
yeah, no, thanks for going down memory lane with me for a bit and for holding space for us all these years. I was just talking last night to my partner just about how it's really crazy that we came up during a time before YouTube went,
Yep.
with viral stuff, and before social media. And so I think that a lot of the work with Two Tongues really lives in certain people who experience that and
Yep.
either continue to talk about it or teach it. So I think it's interesting that way, that was kind of that window of time we had,
Yeah.
which and it was a time when we were still sending out like VHS tapes of like our performances to get gigs.
Right.
Um, but it was a beautiful time. It was a powerful time, and
Yeah.
I think it continues to inspire people. So I'm very grateful to you for keeping that flame lit.
Okay. Well, thank you again. I can't wait to get the session out, and I look forward to seeing what you and your husband continue to do. And enjoy the rest of your Friday. I will stay in touch.
Okay, thank you so much.